Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Sam Morris and I am a solutions architect at GitLab. Today I'm going to show you how to run a DAST scan against your running application, authenticating with AWS Cognito. Starting with a couple of caveats here is that we don't want to run an authenticated scan against a production application, as these will run the DAST scan tests as that authenticated user. So we don't want to cause any, performance issues with your production application. We should probably run this on a review app or some other test application or server. Some variables that we'll want to keep in mind here include the DAST auth URL. So this is the URL that is pointing to your login form that you'll use your DAST credentials that will pass into the pipeline to authenticate and do the crawling of your application. Some other things to keep in mind too are like the DAST auth password, DAST auth username, and some other variables that you can leverage here. So let's take a look at what our application is. So I'm in my AWS console. I can kind of show you how I went through and did this process. So first things first, we have our application. All the code is uploaded to S3. This is because it's a very easy way to host just like a static application. So I have something called DAST example site here, and index.html is the front page and also the login page, and contains the code to do the actual authentication authorization of the user. So I also have a vulnerable.html. This is a page that we go to upon successful authentication. So that will allow us to have some vulnerable code to actually get some DAST results. The reason, again, that this is an S3 is that I set this to have static web hosting enabled. So I have a bucket website endpoint that I can access if I want to directly access this site. However, you'll notice that the beginning of this is HTTP and not HTTPS, which is required for the OAuth flow that we have set up for AWS Cognito. So I put this behind a CloudFront distribution, which is a global CDN. So here's CloudFront, my distribution. I automatically populated a domain name. Again, this is for testing purposes, so I don't have a custom URL here, or custom domain. But essentially, I have this so it's forwarding HTTP to HTTPS, so that we can successfully set up our AWS Cognito correctly. And if I ever have to refresh the content, like I change anything in S3, I don't have anything fun and fancy in Terraform to do that, to update my cloud infrastructure. However, I can do an invalidation and essentially just like refresh doing a /* wildcard so that I'm refreshing all of my files that I update in S3 so that my CloudFront distribution reflects the changes properly. So at this point, I could actually try to access this domain name. This is going to be the main domain name of my login form. So if I go here, this as myself, I can click here and sign in. But there's another step here where we actually want to see AWS Cognito to do our authentication flow. So Cognito allows you to create AWS credentials for federated identities. So we'll hop in here. As soon as you get here, you can create a user pool. So I created an example user pool, which essentially has a set of users. I created one named DAST user, and I gave it an email address that matched my credential requirements. I just used the default ones when I created this. You'll see this confirmation status is confirmed. The only reason that this is confirmed is I automatically reset, I manually reset the password through the AWS CLI. So that's one step that you'll have to do if you create this user. It's a fake user with a username and a password and no email address attached to it. As you can see here, because this is just for my DAST testing purposes, this is not a real account. So I had to use my AWS CLI in an admin role, so get the access token and the secret key of an administrator to do the verification by resetting the password. So this is my user, and I also made sure that there was no multi-factor authentication required for the client that I created. So if I click on app integration, I can see this client. So you can see my Cognito domain, some other stuff, your signing URL, all that. None of this has to be modified or updated. The only thing that you'd have to do is create an app client. So this is my DAST client name and my client ID. So if I select my client name, I kept all of the default settings. I did update in here, hosted UI. I updated my OAuth grant types. So if I go in here and click edit, I did set up the callback URL. You do need at least one callback URL to redirect to after authentication. So I actually have it set up in my app.js that upon successful authentication, I go to a different page, which is the vulnerable.html. So I kept the callback, just the main page here. Then I set up my identity provider. You do need at least one. The only option here is Cognito user pool. So you select that. And then you can set up your OAuth 2 grant types. This will allow you to do the OAuth authentication. So I did authorization code grant and implicit grant. And then I selected my OpenID Connect scopes. You have to select OpenID as to access the other things, such as like phone, profile. In this case, I just selected email. And you can also select custom scripts as well, but it's not necessary for this DAST test. All right, so that's it for the client setup. And just to verify the code example here, this is my app.js. So essentially I get my username and my password value, and I do my authentication flow. All right, so going back into the GitLab pipeline. So I do have my DAST job. It has to be in the stage DAST, and I add some variables as well. So the DAST website I put as the site that I want to scan, which is my CloudFront distribution. My username is the name of the Cognito user, and then my password is my Cognito user's password, which I put asterisks here just for this so that y'all don't see the password that I set. Also, the auth URL, again, is the URL to the login page, which is the index.html that'll be generated upon accessing this site. The OAuth token URL is simply your Cognito URL, which you can get back in the Cognito app. There's the Cognito domain under domain. So I add that and then /OAuth2 /token. And then I say that I want to do a full DAST scan. And that's it. This runs the pipeline. So if we go into our pipelines, we can actually see the pipeline run. So this is the DAST job that ran upon merging my merge request to do all this. And you can see here that it's doing some pre-steps and making sure that all the vulnerability checks are printed out here. But we can check login, loading login page, login URL, and we can verify if the login attempt was successful. And then did not detect login form want, no login form found. Login attempt succeeded. All right. And then we add our URL here as our target, and then that's when the scan goes through and runs. So from here, you can browse your artifacts of the job. And this will produce some results. If you don't want to just look at all of that, you can check your vulnerability report and see the DAST findings. So again, this shows that DAST ran. It shows the URL that this one was detected on. I believe if I click here, I can see a few more URLs. Yeah, and the evidence, the different URLs that were scanned. So you can see the app.js, same app, vulnerable.html, other files, or I suppose paths that were crawled in the DAST scan. So that is an example of how to use AWS Cognito for authentication with your application. In this case, running a static site, but it can apply to others as long as you can set up your auth URL correctly. You should be able to authenticate and run DAST